That's it, Maria. The camera loves you, baby. Maria smiled as she struck another pose. It was all a little fuzzy, the pills making it hard to focus, but she needed them more than the fame these days. The heady drug that was fame had stopped having the same effect on her as it had when she was 16. Not even the same rush they had held for her when she was in her mid-20s. And now, staying a little bit high was the only way she felt much of anything. She continued to strike poses long after the flash had stopped going off, and when someone touched her arm, she jumped like a scalded cat. It was Maurice, her manager, and he had that worried look he sometimes got. It was the look that asked her, in a loud and shaking voice, how much she'd had to drink today, or which one of the disreputable fellas she had purchased today's pills from. He was such a worrier, and it would have been heartwarming if it weren't so tiresome. There, ready for the next girl, Maria. Let me help you to your dressing room. She pulled gently out of his grasp, giving him a slightly lopsided smile. There's no need, Maurice. I can find it just fine. She took a step and immediately expelled that notion by tripping over a cord and going down on her face. Her hands immediately came up to said face, checking to make sure there hadn't been any damage. This was her livelihood, all she had left of her late-teen stardom, and if anything happened to it, she'd be sunk. Maurice was running to help her, but someone else was reaching down to offer her a hand. She accepted it gratefully until she realized that it belonged to Jewel. Are you okay, Miss Fontaine? That was a nasty spill. I wanted to make sure you were... I'm fine, Maria hissed at the girl, pulling away as she righted herself. Maurice, make sure the crewmen secure those power lines a little better. Could have broken my neck. Maurice hadn't even finished trying to appease her when she stormed off towards her dressing room. She could already hear the little bitch, Jennifer Jewel Santiago, telling him that she hoped Maria was all right. She was such a big fan, and she thought of her as an inspiration, and she couldn't imagine how she would feel if anything happened to her. The simpering little twit went on, but Maria was well versed in her games. She knew the little girl couldn't wait for something to happen to her. Then she'd have the stage, the covers, all of it to herself. She could pretend that she was a good girl while people were watching, but Maria knew how she must hate her behind the scenes. She knew because it was exactly how Maria hated her. She slammed the door to her dressing room and flopped down in her chair before the large mirror of her vanity. She looked at herself in the mirror, studying her topography as if she meant to commit it to memory. She was intimately familiar with every wrinkle and every blemish. She had studied every dimple, every pockmark, and thank God there were few of those. She could have drawn herself from memory, and though some people would call it vanity, Maria always thought of it as an interest in her career. Some women had something to fall back on, a talent or an interest, but all Maria had was her pretty face. Hadn't her mother told her so? Hadn't she watched her as she sat before a vanity much like this one, and told her daughter that all women really had in this world were their looks? Once your looks were gone, it didn't matter how bright or talented you were. Once your looks were gone, the world would turn its back on you. As all beautiful women know, came a voice from behind her, making her jump. Maria glanced into the mirror and saw a grinning corpse standing in the corner of her dressing room. It was dressed in a long, luxurious black suit, its hair slicked back over its very soft-looking forehead. Its smile was much too large, and Maria suddenly didn't want him to get too close. She thought maybe he might bite her. She hadn't thought something like that since she was a little girl, but she thought it now. How did you get in here? She breathed out with a confidence she certainly didn't feel. 1,000 pardons, madam. I had inquired with your assistant where you might be found, and he told me to look for you here. Maria was unsure whether she believed him or not. Maurice, despite being a bit flighty at times, did not often invite strange men into her dressing room, at least not without telling her first. He especially didn't make a habit of doing it after being on set with her all morning. When had this fellow talked to him? Sometime in the early morning when they had first got there, during her only bathroom break about 3 hours ago. As she looked at him through the reflection of the mirror, she let her hands inch towards the heavy perfume bottle on her vanity, preparing to fling it at him if he came at her. "I don't make a habit of receiving people in my dressing room. I think I'd like you to leave and go make an appointment with Maurice, like people usually do." The man did not scuttle off like a kicked dog, as she had expected he would. His smile grew even wider as he leaned on a cane that she had up until then not noticed. He reminded her of the picture that she had seen in the Phantom of the Opera book that she had loved so much when she was young. He could have been a twin to the Phantom himself, his face looking like so much skin stretched over a skull. "Bad day on the set, eh?" he asked, taking a step out of the corner. Maria said nothing, just watched in the mirror as he leered at her through the glass. "It's a shame that someone of your talent has to look behind them for circling vultures, like your understudy, Jewel. What's she plotting behind those kind eyes and empty platitudes?" Maria still wanted to yell at the man to get the hell out, but he was making quite a lot of sense. Maybe she wasn't the only one who had noticed the little bitch scheming. If others had come to see it, maybe it wasn't so crazy. If this man could see it too, maybe it was more than just her mind playing tricks on her. Of course, who could blame them? Her star is rising, while yours may be preparing to fall. She has youth on her side, something that is quickly slipping through your grasp. "What's your point?" Maria asked, still not trusting him, but willing to listen. "Only that I can offer you something that she cannot get at her current level of fame. I've come to offer my services, perhaps to help you in some way." Maria had suspected as much. He was here to sell something. He wouldn't be the first to come and try to tempt her with beauty products and snake oil. He seemed less sinister now, more something she was familiar with, and when she turned around to look at him, she let go of the perfume bottle. People who wanted to show you things, as a rule, did not try to kill you. "Now, I'm very certain that I want you out. I have several contracts with several different skincare companies. I'm not open to trying out some strange beauty product that is more likely to ruin my skincare routine than benefit it. Now go, before I call the..." She stopped suddenly when he pulled the bottle out of his coat pocket. It was like nothing that she had ever seen, and it would have looked right at home on the desk of some alchemist. The bottle was like gemstone, holding facets and pools that made its depth shine. The liquid was the color of caramelized whiskey, and despite being absolutely still, it seemed to move as if constantly being pulled by some tidal force. "It's beautiful," she said, surprised by her own words. "It's the secret to what you're looking for. A single drop will renew what you've lost. But you have to drink that drop every day." Part of her wanted to deny it, and part of her wanted to ask how that could be. But the only thing that came out was a little of both. "How is that possible?" "It's an industry secret," the skeletal man told her. "The real question is whether you will accept it or not." Now some of the old doubt had begun to return, and Maria wasn't entirely sure she wanted to take the stranger at his word. Just like before, though, it was as if he could read her mind. "I see a demonstration is in order." He removed the tip of the crystalline vessel, revealing an equally delicate-looking dropper. He squeezed a single drop into it, pulled it out as he offered it to her. The liquid set within the dropper, new life waiting to begin, and Maria found that she wanted it. She was hungry for what lay within that dropper. "A single drop," he reminded her. "That's all you need." He held it out, tempting to drop it onto the edge of the precipice. and Maria found herself leaning forward as she opened her mouth to receive it. The single drop hit her tongue like a bomb, and she coughed as the sour taste of corruption passed down her throat. It wasn't just her tongue, however. She felt a kind of tightening on her skin. She had wanted to cry out, to ask this man why he had poisoned her, but instead she was left speechless as the corruption did its work. It felt as if someone had cranked her flesh to the ripping point, and when she sat back hard against the vanity, she heard the rattle of bottles. She turned, expecting to see her face purpling in the mirror, but as she watched, her body shed 15 years in seconds. Suddenly, she was 16 again, her skin as smooth and fresh as it had been on that long-ago day. She marveled at what she saw, but she knew even then that she would have to have more. Wondrous, isn't it? You're one of the few who can actually watch it happen without losing some grip on your mind. I've known people who don't come back from that first enticing drop. As she touched her face, Maria had only one question. How much? The man smiled. Fortunately for you, you have the kind of wealth to afford this sort of extravagance that I offer. The price is on the back of this business card, as is the number you will need to order more. Once you've started, you will want to continue. She took the card and looked at the number, narrowing her eyes a little at the back side of it. The number was high, but not enough to dissuade her. She could pay it. She could pay it 1,000 times over, and she flipped it over to see the name on the other side. If she was going to be doing business with this man, she wanted to know his name, and what a name it turned out to be. Richard T. Sereph was a name she would come to cherish and despise as time went on. Maria looked into the mirror as the drop fell onto her tongue. She had watched it happen 1,000 times before, maybe even 100,000, but she never grew tired of watching herself de-age. She had become something of an anomaly in the modeling world, and at this rate, she could continue on well into her 50s. As her skin returned to the same rosy smoothness it had held when she was 16, Maria smiled. She would be 42 this year, but you'd never know it. Before she turned away, she had to squint at something she almost thought she'd seen. It almost looked like someone was in the bathroom with her, but that was impossible. She had checked to make sure the bathroom was empty before she came in. No one had come in since, but it wasn't the first time she had caught something out of the corner of her eye. Over the years, she constantly saw things, especially when she was at her vanity. They were usually gone when she looked up, but it was hard to shake the feeling that she wasn't alone sometimes. It hardly mattered, she thought. She slid the bottle back into her purse. The drops beat the pills and the booze for hallucinations any day of the week, anyway. The little vial held enough of the precious liquid for 5 years, and the price for them was becoming quite dear. Had she really looked at that first number and thought it was large? Now she paid 5 times as much for the bottle she held. Soon it would be 5 times that, if she kept on like this. Beauty had become a drug for her, and she found that it was addictive. Not long until she'd have to recreate herself and come up with a different name. Would she be her granddaughter? Maybe a niece? It didn't matter. Maria wasn't as addicted to modeling as she was to the wonderful liquid in that glass bottle. She was returning to the party, the one they were holding in celebration of her 41st birthday, but she bumped into a familiar face on the way out of the women's room. She mumbled something about being more careful, but that's when she saw the girl. "Miss Fontaine, it's so nice to see you. How long has it been?" Maria put on her best fake smile as she greeted the rival from her past. "Jewel, I haven't seen you in years. How have you been?" Not good, Maria would guess. While Maria's star had been rising, Jennifer Santiago's had fallen like a comet. The poor girl was still modeling, still getting her name out there, but her 5 minutes of fame had been fleeting indeed. When the first drop of that scrumptious liquid had hit Maria's tongue, the girl's name had been on the lips of anyone in the industry. They had expected she would go far, a name that would launch clothing lines and sell fragrances for decades to come. But it had fizzled, instead, a few years later. Some of that had been thanks to the resurgence of Maria's career, but most of it was just simple luck and politics. The girl's agent hadn't been quite as talented as Maurice. Few of them were, and she'd fallen into obscurity after a short stint in notoriety. Maurice. Another person Maria hadn't thought about in a while. It really had been a shame to lose his amazing business acumen, but the heart attack that had killed him a few years ago hadn't exactly asked for permission. "Yes," Jules said in a slight stutter. It's been a rough couple of years. I see you're doing well, though, looking as good as always." Maria smiled. She knew it was so, but it was always nice to hear people tell her. "Well, it's been great catching up, but I have to get back to my party. Why don't you come down to Raltz's studio tomorrow? I'll put in a good word for you. Perhaps he needs some background models or something." She finished as she set the barb. "How do you do it?" Maria stopped when Jewel asked the question, her feet suddenly frozen like ice. "Pardon? How do you do it? How do you look the same after 20 years of doing this?" Maria started to tell the girl it was none of her business, but decided to give her the usual response. "Just my usual skincare routine, exercise, and a lot of leafy greens, and my..." When Jewel rounded on her, her face looked furious. The girl was only 26, she had no right to look so haggard, but perhaps when the work dried up, she hadn't been able to maintain her level of commitment to the lifestyle. Lack a proper diet, having to live like a normal person, maybe partying it up while she had the funds to do so. It all took a toll, and now she was reaping the consequences. She was old before her time, and unless she could scrabble up the money to pay Mr. Sereph, she'd stay old forever. "Cut the crap. I know there's something secret that you used to stay young. The day I saw you, you looked 31. The next time I saw you, you looked even younger than that. How do you do it? How does it work? I have to have it. I have to have it. I have to." As she'd been talking, she'd been getting closer to Maria. Her hands had become claws as she grabbed for her, latching onto her bag instead. Maria yelled for help, trying to push the girl away as the two fought, but when her expensive bag came tumbling off the shoulder, Maria heard the shattering glass. She was suddenly as furious as her attacker. She had just purchased that bottle, and it had not come cheaply. This girl, this broke bitch, probably didn't have enough money in her bank account for a taste, let alone what had been in that bottle. Now she was going to have to go back to Mr. Sereph and tell him how she needed another bottle of this miracle liquid. She would tell him, and he would smile. Then he would hand her a number on the back of the card, and she would pay it, no matter how much it was. If she had to prostitute herself on the street corner to buy another drop of youth, she would pay it gladly. The wait staff pulled Jewel off of her, but the damage was already done. Maria grabbed her bag to make sure, but she already knew what the sound was. The bottle was nothing but broken glass inside her bag, but the inside was dry as a desert. Whatever the liquid wasn't normal. Maria didn't really care much for the chemical makeup, though, as she pushed past her friends, made a running gait for the street. She only knew that she wanted more. "You don't understand. It wasn't my fault. It was some flighty little bitch who just had to." The man's voice was crude oil and snake scales as he spoke to her over the phone, and she knew the smile running over his face like mouse feet. "My dear Maria, I don't care if King Kong descended from the Empire State Building and crushed you and your bottle flat on Fifth Avenue. The bottle is broken, and you need more. Then I will sell it to you. The price, however, will be steep." Maria nodded into the phone, having known it would be. It would be expensive, and Maria had expected that There would be no way that she could get recompense from Jennifer Santiago's estate for her damaged goods. What would she put on a property form? Bottle full of magic liquid that makes me 16 forever? They would laugh at her, and the price tag. No, Maria already knew that she would be out of pocket for this one, and this one was going to hurt her. "Tell you what I'll do," Mr. Sereph oiled. "I'll give you a new bottle at the cost of the old bottle. Call it a little generosity for a returning client. This, however, is a one-time thing. Don't expect this kind of kindness every time you have a little accident." Maria thanked him big. The price he was asking was still extremely high, but it was better than 5 times that cost. Mr. Sereph could talk about kindness all he wanted, but he knew that she'd be back anyway. He had her hooked, and he knew that she needed what he had. She would pay whatever he asked until whatever he asked might be too much for even her rising star. She would have to be more careful with these bottles from now on. The new bottle had been on her vanity when she got back from the photo shoot the next day. Good thing, too, because Maria had already begun to notice the effects of not having it. Her skin just felt looser. Her energy wasn't there today, and she had gone out during the morning break and done something she hadn't done in a long time. Joel had still been pushing his so-called pretty pills, though Maria was pretty sure they were a little more than garden variety amphetamines. She hadn't touched the stuff in years, but she really needed them to go through the day today. She had performed in a fog, nowhere near up to her usual standards, when she got back to her dressing room after a long day of playing dress-up. She was rapturous at the sight of that beautiful little bottle. She took one immediately, the liquid dropping on her tongue as easily as it had the first time, and she watched as her beauty returned. She had once found the process a little dizzying, but now it came only with a sense of exhilaration. The day had aged her, and she looked 40 by the time she had come stumbling off the set. But now, everything was right again, and she, the creature standing in the corner behind her, made her scream in terror. It wasn't the bony and off-putting Mr. Sereph this time. It was a shadowy woman with living coals for eyes. She had leaned against the junction of the room, and her fingertips seemed to stretch across the walls as she prepared to spring. The woman's shadowy hair was thick and luxurious, falling around her like a cloak of smog, and as she came flying towards the vanity, Maria fell to the side and covered herself with her hands as she lay in a ball. She expected to be attacked, to be scratched or bitten, but when nothing happened after 30 seconds of cowering, she opened her eyes to find no one but herself in the dressing room. Mr. Sereph picked up on the second ring and sounded surprised to hear from her. "Don't tell me you need another bottle already. I can assure you that the deal won't be as good. For this, what exactly did you give me?" He was silent for a few seconds, clearly not used to being spoken to in such a way. "Why, the same thing I've given you twice before. Is something wrong with it?" "A shadow person tried to attack me while I was looking in the mirror. I'd say that's something wrong with it." His next question left her speechless. "Has that never happened before? I've been told they can be a little upsetting." "What do you mean?" she breathed after some contemplation. "Did you think the liquid wouldn't come with a price? The others report seeing them right away. I'm surprised it took you this long." Maria felt her breath hang a little as his words cascaded over her. "Others?" Mr. Sereph surprised her when his laugh rolled out like an excited wave. "Did you think you were the only one? Did you think you were special? In another life, you would have been one of those shadows you see in the mirror. But no, you have wealth and privilege, so you may continue to shine." Maria was dumbfounded, trying to find words, but unable. The shades were like her. They were the shadows of those who had come before her. She didn't understand at all, but she understood enough. The bottle was filled with their beauty, their life, and she was taking it to keep herself young. She looked back at the mirror, and there was the fiery-eyed shade standing right behind her. She was smog, angry smoke in motion, and Maria saw that her hands were balled at her side. She was familiar somehow. She was someone Maria knew. Maria couldn't prove it, but she felt sure that it was Jewel. She had failed to rise, failed to come back, and now she wanted to know how Maria had kept her beauty. Jewel had wanted to know bad enough to seek out the mysterious Mr. Sereph, and now she knew all too well the source of Maria's power. Her power and her vanity. Maria leaned her head against the glass, watching the fiery woman as she moved within the mirror. Maria felt tears slide down her face as she realized that despite this knowledge, she wouldn't stop. She would go back to the bottle again and again, because the alternative was watching herself turn old before her very eyes, and that would be a hell too much for her. Youth had become her drug, and the high was more heady than any pill or potion she had ever taken. Maria wondered if she would be a shadow in the mirror one day. Maybe when she couldn't afford the magical liquid, she would find out what became of those lost beauties once their youth was all used up. You're still here. Thanks so much for joining us for tonight's spooky tale. If you'd like a little bit more spooky in your life, why not click on one of the videos that appears at the end of our story, or maybe head on over to one of our playlists where you can get your fill of spooky content. If you like your spooky a little more tactile, I've got a new book that's come out. If you'd like your own copy, there's a link below in the description where you can get your own copy of my spooky book. If you like what you see here on the channel and think you might like to support in a more monetized way, then why not come over to Patreon or become a member on YouTube? Speaking of, let's go ahead and thank our members now. Thanks to Civ Garstad and Unicorn Hollow for being our spooky ghost contributors. Thanks to Saikat, Lee Kendall, Janet, and Chris Kinsella for being our spooky skeleton tier contributors. And of course, thanks to Xaronan, Winter, Tyler Parker, Stephanie Carrington, Sarah ASMR, Hi Stacy, Emily Coltsfoot, and Cinnamon Fox, and Bella Lee for being our ghostly reader tier contributors. Thanks everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. As I said, if you'd like to have your name read out at the end of every episode that I make, and maybe get a little more, come on down to Patreon and sign up, or become a member on YouTube. Ghostly Reader tier contributors get a book anytime I write one, which is usually about twice a year. So, what are you waiting for? Come on down and give it a look. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.